The smell hit Oberst Klaus Dietrich first. Death in autumn rain carries a particular sweetness, wet wool and copper, mud and something else he could never name, the metallic tang of fear maybe, or the rot that starts before a body finishes dying. His breath misted in the cold morning air, the trees dripped, water ran down his collar, cold against his spine. Somewhere in the grey distance a crow screamed. He stood at the edge of the clearing and counted. 1, 2, 3. His adjutant stood beside him, silent. The young man had stopped writing in his notebook somewhere around 20. The pencil hung loose in his fingers now, forgotten. 14, 15, 16. The bodies lay scattered through the trees like broken dolls. Some face down in the mud, arms spread as if embracing the earth. Others twisted against tree trunks, eyes still open to the October sky that would never again mean anything to them. The forest of Hurtgen had swallowed them whole and spit them back out as warnings. 32, 33, 34. Dietrich had commanded men since Poland in 1939. He had seen Stalingrad. He had pulled burning soldiers from tanks in the Ukraine. But this was different. This was surgical, methodical. This was death delivered with patience and precision. 47, 48. The rain picked up. It always rained here. The mud sucked at his boots as he moved deeper into the killing ground. His hand rested on his sidearm, though he knew there was no one here anymore. Whoever did this was gone, like smoke, like a ghost that knew these woods better than God himself. 61, 62, 63, 64. He stopped counting. His adjutant finally spoke, voice cracking like thin ice. "Sir, the radio message to Berlin. What should I say?" Dietrich stared at a young private, maybe 19, slumped against a pine tree. The boy's letters to home were still in his breast pocket. Dietrich could see the corner of one, stained pink with rain and blood. The ink was running, making the words illegible, making the boy's last thoughts disappear into the mud. "Tell them we encountered a specialized American sniper unit. Tell them we need to pull back and regroup." "How many snipers, sir? For the report." Dietrich closed his eyes, took a breath that tasted like cordite and decay, opened them again. 15, maybe 20. The adjutant's hand shook as he wrote. They both knew what 20 snipers in these woods could do, how long they could hold a position, how many more German boys would die trying to root them out, how Division would demand they advance anyway because Division was 20 kilometers away and couldn't smell the death. Dietrich turned away from the bodies, his boots squelched in the mud. Behind him, the forest held its secrets close. Somewhere in those trees, the Americans had set a trap so perfect, so complete, that 64 trained soldiers had walked into it and never walked out. The rain fell harder. Somewhere, a crow called out. And in the silence that followed, Dietrich heard nothing at all. No gunfire, no movement, just the forest breathing, waiting. 72 hours earlier. The mountains of Montana don't forgive mistakes. Elijah Hargrove learned that at age 8, the winter his mother died. She caught pneumonia in November and was gone by Christmas. No hospital within 50 miles. No doctor who could have saved her anyway. Just his father, kneeling by her bed in their cabin, holding her hand until it went cold, singing her the old songs, staying with her until the end. After that, it was just the two of them, Nathaniel and Eli, trapper and son. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that disappeared in winter, buried under snow so deep you couldn't see fence posts. Absaroka County, Montana. Population 280 souls, scattered across valleys and ridges that stretched up toward the Beartooth Mountains. The nearest town was Fishtail. 16 buildings and a post office that only opened 3 days a week. On Sundays, they'd get maybe 40 people in church. On good Sundays. They were poor. Everyone was poor. The Depression had hit Montana like a hammer in 1929 and never really let up. Banks failed. Ranches collapsed. Men who'd owned land for generations walked away with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Nathaniel Hargrove made his living running trap lines through the high country, selling pelts to buyers who came through twice a year and paid half what the furs were worth. They ate what they hunted: elk in the fall, rabbit and grouse in the spring, fish from the creek when the ice broke and the water ran clear. One shot, one kill. That was the rule. Ammunition cost money they didn't have. Every cartridge was counted. Every trigger pull had to mean meat on the table or a pelt to sell. No second chances, no wasted rounds, no room for mistakes when winter was coming and the snow didn't care if you were hungry. Nathaniel taught him to shoot when he was 9, an old Winchester lever action that kicked like a mule and bruised his shoulder purple the first week. They'd walk the ridge lines at dawn, breath smoking in the frozen air, and Nathaniel would point out tracks in the snow with his bare hand. Mule deer, buck. See how deep the prints are? He's heavy, good eating, feed us for 2 weeks if we're careful. How far, you figure? Quarter mile, maybe less. Wind's coming down from the north. We move quiet, we can get within 200 yards. That's your range. That's where you shoot. They would stalk for hours, slow, patient. Nathaniel moving like water through the brush, teaching Eli to place each foot with care, to test the ground before putting weight down, to control his breathing so it wouldn't fog and give away position, to wait until the animal stopped, turned, presented the shot that would kill clean and quick. One shot, one kill. By age 12, Eli could drop a running coyote at 300 yards. By 14, he was running his own trap lines, checking them before dawn, skinning and stretching pelts by lantern light while his father slept. By 16, he could read the forest like other boys read books. Every broken twig told a story, every scrape on a tree trunk, every depression in the moss where something had bedded down for the night. The forest spoke to him in a language older than words. His father didn't talk much. Mountain men rarely did. But when he spoke, Eli listened like his life depended on it, because it did. Patience beats speed every single time, son. Remember that. You can't outrun a wolf, can't outfight a bear, but you can outsmart them both. Brain beats muscle when the chips are down. The trap does the work. You just have to know where to set it. Let the animal kill itself. It was the spring of 1932 when Nathaniel taught him the bootlace trick. They'd been losing chickens to a wolf, big male, grey and scarred, smart enough to avoid the steel traps Nathaniel had set around the coop. For 2 weeks, the wolf had come in the night, killed a hen, and vanished back into the trees before they could get a shot. They were losing food they couldn't afford to lose. Each chicken meant eggs, meant protein, meant survival. Nathaniel sat at the kitchen table one evening, working a piece of rawhide through his fingers, thinking, silent. Eli watched him, waiting. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like the ocean, a sound Eli had never heard except in his imagination. Wolf's too smart for steel, Nathaniel said finally. Smells it, sees it, won't go near it. Probably watched me set every damn trap. So what do we do? His father reached down and untied one of his boots, pulled the lace free. Brown leather, worn smooth, frayed at the ends, held it up to the lamplight. We let him spring the trap himself. The next morning they set it up. Nathaniel tied one end of the bootlace to a loaded rifle, wedged tight between 2 rocks 30 feet from the chicken coop. The other end he stretched across a game trail the wolf had been using, tied it to a sapling bent back under tension. The lace was old, brown, nearly invisible against the dirt and dead leaves. When the wolf came through and hit that lace, the sapling would snap forward. The pull would jerk the trigger. The rifle would fire. Now we wait, Nathaniel said, standing back to admire his work. Patience, son. Always patience. Wolf will come when he's ready. We'll be ready too. They waited 2 nights. On the 3rd, just after midnight, they heard it. A single rifle shot, echoing across the valley. Sharp. Final. Then silence. In the morning, they found the wolf dead on the trail, the bootlace still tangled around its legs. The bullet had taken it clean through the heart. 1 shot, 1 kill. The wolf had killed itself. Nathaniel knelt beside the animal, ran a hand through its fur, showed proper respect to a worthy adversary, looked up at Eli with eyes that held all the wisdom of the mountains. Sometimes the best way to kill something is to let it kill itself. You remember that. When you're hunting something smarter than you, patience and a good trap beat speed every time. Eli never forgot that lesson. He carried it with him when he left Montana in 1943, drafted into a war he barely understood, carried it across the Atlantic on a transport ship packed with other farm boys who'd never seen an ocean and spent most of the voyage vomiting over the rail, carried it through basic training at Fort Benning, where drill sergeants screamed and men learned to kill with bayonets and bare hands. Carried it onto the beaches of France in the summer of '44 when the world exploded around him and nothing his father had taught him seemed to matter anymore. But in the Hurtgen forest, in October, when everything went to hell and 64 Germans needed to die, that bootlace trick would matter more than anything else in the world. It would save hundreds of American lives. It would end 64 German ones. And it would prove that sometimes the quietest lessons from the quietest fathers are the ones that echo loudest when the shooting starts. October 14th, 1944, 06:30 hours. Company K, 110th Infantry Regiment, 28th Infantry Division, was dying in the woods. The German 88s had started at dawn. High-explosive shells screaming down through the canopy, detonating in airbursts that sent shrapnel singing through the trees like horizontal rain. Then the mortars. Then the machine guns, that distinctive ripping sound of an MG-42, like fabric tearing, 750 rounds per minute of pure hate. Then the German infantry, moving through the smoke like grey wolves, methodical and professional, killing with the efficiency of men who'd been doing this for 5 years. Eli lay flat in a crater, face pressed into mud that tasted like copper and cordite and blood. Around him, men screamed. Men called for medics who were already dead. Men called for their mothers and died with their faces in the dirt, fingers clawing at earth that wouldn't save them. Private First Class Alvin Makepeace was 3 feet away, firing his M1 Garand in controlled bursts at shapes moving through the smoke. Alvin was from Nebraska, corn farmer's son, built like a barn door, gentle as a lamb, could drink any man under the table and still walk straight. He'd been Eli's foxhole partner since Normandy. They'd crossed France together, lived through hedgerow country and artillery barrages, and nights when the cold tried to kill them as surely as any German bullet. "Eli!" Alvin's voice cut through the noise. "We gotta fall back! Captain's orders! Move, goddammit!" Eli lifted his head. Through the trees, he could see the rest of Company K pulling back, moving in sections, covering each other as they retreated toward the rally point, 200 yards west. They were supposed to hold this sector for 3 more days. Division needed time to regroup after the disaster at Schmidt. But the Germans had other plans. An 88 shell hit a tree 20 yards away. The concussion slapped Eli's ears flat. His vision went white. Wood splinters filled the air like horizontal rain, each piece sharp enough to kill. When his hearing came back, Alvin was screaming his name. Eli crawled to him. The shrapnel had caught Alvin in the gut, 3 jagged holes, each the size of a silver dollar, pumping blood faster than any man could afford to lose. Alvin's hands were pressed against the wounds, but the blood came through his fingers, black in the morning light, steaming in the cold air. "Eli, I can't." You're okay. Medic. But the medics were busy dying elsewhere. The company was pulling back. In 30 seconds, this position would be overrun. In 60, they'd both be dead. Alvin grabbed Eli's collar, pulled him close. His breath came in short gasps, whistling through teeth clenched against pain that would break most men. "Get out. Go. That's an order." "Al, I can't." "Private First Class Makepeace, giving Corporal Hargrove a direct order." Alvin tried to smile. Blood on his teeth, blood on his lips. "Get your ass out of here. Live. Go home. Tell them I wasn't scared." An MG-42 opened up somewhere close. Bullets chewed through the trees above them, so close Eli could feel the air pressure change with each round passing. Eli pressed his hand over Alvin's, trying to slow the bleeding, knowing it was useless. knowing his friend was dying and there was nothing he could do except bear witness. "I'm sorry, Al." "Nothing to be sorry for?" Alvin's voice was getting quieter, fading like a radio signal. "Just tell my folks I did okay. Tell them I held the line." "You did better than okay. You did perfect." "Eli, go, now, please." Eli squeezed his friend's shoulder once, hard, a goodbye, a promise. Then he grabbed his rifle and ran. Behind him, Alvin Makepeace kept firing until his magazine ran dry. Then he reloaded with shaking hands, fired again, buying seconds for his brothers to escape, buying time with his life. When the Germans finally overran the position, they found him slumped against a tree, empty magazines scattered around him like spent prayers. He was 22 years old. He never saw Nebraska again. His mother would receive a telegram 3 weeks later. His father would fold it carefully, put it in a drawer, and never speak of it again. Company K rallied a mile west in a clearing that offered good sight lines and a fighting chance. They'd started the morning with 95 men. They ended it with 57, 38 dead or missing. The walking wounded were patched up with whatever the medics had left, mostly pressure bandages and morphine. The ones who couldn't walk were loaded onto stretchers and started back toward the battalion aid station, on a journey that would kill 3 more before they made it. Captain Thaddeus Boone stood in the center of the clearing, face blackened with powder residue, studying a map that was more mud than paper. He was 36, ancient by infantry standards. Before the war, he'd been a high school history teacher in Philadelphia, taught kids about Valley Forge and Gettysburg, and wars that seemed romantic from the safety of a classroom. Now he taught boys how to survive one more day in a forest that wanted them all dead. "Listen up!" His voice cut through the low murmur of exhausted men. "Division called. We need to fall back to Aachen, regroup, re-equip, get some rest. But the Germans are pushing hard on this sector. They want to retake the ground we took yesterday, use it as a staging point for a counteroffensive against our supply lines." He looked up from the map, met the eyes of his remaining soldiers, saw the exhaustion, saw the fear, saw boys who'd aged 10 years in 3 hours. "Battalion needs 3 days. 3 days to pull back in good order, establish a new defensive line, get reinforcements up from reserve, which means somebody needs to stay here, slow the Germans down, make them think twice about advancing too fast, make them pay for every yard." Nobody spoke. 3 days in the Herdgen, alone, with a German army coming. That wasn't a mission. That was a death sentence written in blood. Boone folded the map. "I'm asking for volunteers. I won't order any man to stay. But if we don't delay them here, every unit pulling back is going to get hit from the flank. A lot more men are going to die. Men who have families waiting. Men who deserve to go home." The silence stretched. 57 men, standing in the rain, thinking about home, about the odds, about whether dying here meant something or just meant dying, about whether their lives were worth trading for strangers' lives. Eli stepped forward. "I'll do it, sir." Boone looked at him, really looked, saw a kid from Montana with mud on his face and blood on his hands, saw a rifleman who'd been solid since Normandy, never complained, never broke. Saw something else, too, something in the eyes, something that understood how to be alone in the wild and survive, something that knew patience. "Hargrove, you understand what you're volunteering for?" "Yes, sir." 3 days, minimum. Maybe more if division gets delayed. You'll be alone, no backup, no reinforcements, no one's coming to save you if it goes bad, just you and whatever Germans come through this sector." "I understand, sir." "What makes you think you can hold them?" Eli looked at the trees, at the ridgelines, at the narrow trails that wound through the forest like veins carrying blood through a body. He thought about trap lines in Montana, about wolves and bootlaces, about his father's voice in the dark. "My father taught me how to hunt, sir, taught me how to trap. Germans aren't that different from animals when you think about it. They follow patterns, they make mistakes, they get scared, and they die if you're patient enough." Boone studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Corporal, you've got your mission. Hold this sector for 72 hours minimum. Use whatever means necessary. If you're still alive when we come back, there'll be a hot meal and a warm bunk waiting for you, and a bottle of whiskey with your name on it." "Thank you, sir." Boone extended his hand. Eli shook it. The captain's grip was firm, but Eli could feel the tremor in his fingers, the weight of sending a man to die, the knowledge that this decision would follow him for the rest of his life. "Good luck, Hargrove." "Won't need luck, sir, just time. And patience. I got plenty of both." The company pulled out at 1400 hours. They left Eli with 2 Springfield rifles, 180 rounds of .30-06 ammunition, 5 fragmentation grenades, 4 days' worth of K rations, 6 canteens of water, a knife, a first aid kit, and a radio with batteries that might last 2 days if he was lucky and never used it. They also left him with Alvin Makepeace's body. The medics hadn't been able to retrieve him during the retreat. Too much fire, too dangerous. Too many other wounded who could still be saved. They'd get him later, when the line stabilized. Put him in a grave with a wooden cross and send his effects home to Nebraska. Send his parents a flag and a telegram and sorry for your loss. But Eli couldn't leave his friend to the forest, couldn't leave him for the Germans to find, couldn't let Alvin rot in foreign mud like he'd never mattered. When the last man from Company K disappeared into the trees, Eli slung both rifles over his shoulder and walked back east, toward the German lines, toward the crater where Alvin had died, buying time for men who would never know his name. It took him 40 minutes, moving slow and careful, staying off the trails. The Germans were advancing, but they were cautious. They'd learned the hard way that American soldiers didn't always retreat. Sometimes they hid, sometimes they waited, sometimes they came back in the dark and cut throats. He found Alvin where he'd left him. The body was already cold, stiff, eyes half open, staring at nothing. Flies were starting to gather despite the cold. Eli knelt beside him and closed his friend's eyes with 2 fingers. Said a prayer his mother had taught him when he was small, back when prayer still seemed like something that might work. Back when God still seemed to care about Montana and the people in it. Then he unlaced Alvin's boots. The leather was worn thin, cracked. The laces were olive drab, standard issue, frayed at the ends from 100 miles of marching through France and Germany. Eli pulled them free one at a time and coiled them carefully. 4 laces total, maybe 10 feet of cord. "I'm sorry, Al," he whispered to the body, "but I'm going to need these. Going to use them the way my father taught me. Going to make them count for something. Going to make 64 Germans pay for what they did to you." He searched Alvin's pockets. Found a letter to a girl back home, never mailed. A photograph of his parents standing in front of a barn, smiling, proud. A lucky penny, worn smooth from years of rubbing. A pack of gum. Eli took the dog tags, but left everything else. Alvin could keep his memories, could take them to whatever waited beyond. He dragged the body into a shallow depression and covered it with branches and leaves. Not a proper burial, but better than nothing. When the company came back, they'd find him. They'd do it right. They'd send him home. Eli stood over the grave for a moment. The rain had started again. Cold, steady. The kind of rain that soaked through everything and never stopped. 3 days, he said to the forest. "I'll give them 3 days, and then I'm going home. And I'll tell your folks you weren't scared. I'll tell them you held the line. I promise." He picked up both rifles. He checked the wind. He started walking into the German advance, alone, carrying 180 rounds and a dead man's bootlaces. Night fell fast in the Herdkin. The trees were so thick that twilight lasted maybe 15 minutes before full darkness swallowed everything. No stars, no moon, just black so complete it felt solid. Eli moved through it like a ghost, placing each foot with care, avoiding anything that might snap or rustle or give away his position. He'd been doing this since he was a child, moving through darkness, reading the forest by touch and sound. He'd scouted 6 locations before the light failed. 6 spots with good sight lines, good cover, and clear escape routes. He marked them in his mind. Distances, angles, wind direction, everything his father had taught him about reading terrain, about understanding how predators moved, how prey moved, the difference between the two. Now, in the dark, he set his first trap. Position 1 was a fallen oak, half-rotted, lying across a game trail that the Germans had been using as a path through the thickest part of the forest. Eli wedged the first Springfield into a notch in the trunk, angled it down the trail at chest height, loaded a round into the chamber. The metallic click was loud in the silence. Then he pulled out Alvin's bootlace. He tied one end to the trigger, simple square knot, the kind his father had taught him when he was 6, pulled it tight, tested the tension, stretched the lace back through the underbrush, 15 feet until he reached a sapling bent under the weight of deadfall. He secured the other end to the tree, leaving just enough slack that it wouldn't pull the trigger accidentally, just enough tension that the slightest pressure would release it. The setup was elegant, crude, effective, beautiful in its simplicity. When someone walked down that trail and brushed against the bootlace, the tension would release the sapling. The sapling would snap upright. The lace would pull tight. The trigger would fire. One shot, maybe one kill, and 60 Germans would think there was a sniper in those trees. Eli repeated the process at position 3, position 5. By midnight, he had 3 rifles rigged, 3 bootlaces stretched across trails and choke points. The 4th lace he kept for himself. Insurance, in case he needed to set one more trap in a hurry. When he was done, he found a hollow beneath a pine tree, crawled inside, and allowed himself to close his eyes. Sleep came in fits, 10 minutes here, 20 there. His body knew how to rest without truly sleeping. A skill learned on trap lines in Montana, when winter nights could kill you if you let your guard down completely. Around 0400 hours, he heard them. Bootsteps, maybe a dozen men, moving through the forest to the north, slow and cautious. A German patrol, sweeping the sector, making sure the Americans were really gone, making sure it was safe to advance. Eli lay perfectly still, controlled his breathing, slowed his heart rate through sheer will. Let them pass within 50 yards of his hide. He could hear them talking in German, nervous voices, young voices, boys far from home. When they were gone, he crawled out, checked his rifles one more time, and waited for dawn. The sun rose at 06:15. By 06:30, the trap was set. By 0700, 64 Germans would start dying, and Elijah Hargrove, trapper's son from Absaroka County, Montana, would become something the Hurtgen forest had never seen before. A patient man with bootlaces and time to kill. A ghost that would haunt the German army for 3 days. A legend that would stay buried for 50 years. The first German died at 06:43. Eli saw him through a gap in the wet leaves, a narrow window between branches that framed the target like a painting. Young, maybe 19, blonde hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. Clean-shaven, he was walking point for a patrol of 6 men, rifle held low, eyes scanning the trees ahead, but not the ground beneath his feet. Never the ground. That was the mistake. The forest floor would kill you faster than any bullet if you didn't watch it. They were using the game trail, just like Eli knew they would. Animals follow the path of least resistance, so do men. It's why trap lines work. It's why patience wins. He lay 70 yards away, behind a rotted log crusted with moss, the second Springfield pressed tight against his shoulder. His breathing was slow, controlled. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. Heart rate steady. The German patrol moved through the morning mist, like ghosts in grey-green uniforms, their breath visible in the cold air. Eli let them get close, 20 yards from position 1, 15, 10. He squeezed the trigger. The Springfield kicked. The report cracked through the forest like a branch breaking. The German at the rear of the patrol dropped without a sound, a red mist hanging where his head had been. The sound echoed. Once. Twice. Then silence. The other 5 froze for exactly 1 second. Then chaos. "Shoot, sir! Shoot, sir! Sniper! Sniper!" They scattered, dove for cover, returned fire in the general direction Eli had been, pumping rounds into trees and dirt and empty air. Brass casings rained down onto wet leaves. The smell of cordite filled the forest. Eli was already moving, low and fast, circling left through the underbrush, counting in his head. 1, 2, 3. Let them empty their magazines into nothing. 4, 5, 6. The Germans regrouped, shouted to each other. 5 men now, adrenaline high, thinking they'd found the American sniper who'd been harassing their advance. They did what soldiers are trained to do. They moved toward the threat, toward the position where the shot had come from. Straight down the game trail, straight toward position 1. The lead soldier nearly stepped over the bootlace. His boot came down an inch to the left of it, pressing into mud. But the second man wasn't as lucky. His rifle stock caught the lace, pulled it tight. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Time suspended. Then the sapling snapped upright with a sound like a whip crack. The lace jerked, the trigger pulled, the Springfield fired. At 15 feet, the .30-06 round took the German in the chest and punched him backward like he'd been kicked by a horse. He was dead before he hit the ground, heart exploded, body already going slack. The remaining 4 Germans threw themselves flat, screaming, firing wildly into the trees, confused, terrified, their training evaporating in the face of something they didn't understand. "Zwei Schützen! Zwei Schützen! 2 shooters! 2 shooters!" Eli was already gone, melting back into the forest, moving to position 3, 200 yards away. He'd fired 1 shot. The bootlace trap had fired 1 shot. 2 different positions, 2 different directions, 2 different angles. As far as the Germans were concerned, they'd just walked into an ambush by at least 2 American snipers working in coordination. Maybe more, maybe a whole team. By the time they regrouped and cautiously approached position 1, all they found was an empty rifle wedged in a log and a bootlace tied to a sapling. They stared at it for a long time, trying to understand, trying to process what had just happened. One of them cut the lace with his knife, examined it, held it up to the weak morning light. Then they ran, back toward their lines, to report, to warn the others, to tell everyone that the Americans had set up automated firing positions, that there were snipers everywhere, that this forest was death. 2 dead, 4 survivors, and a story that would spread like wildfire through the German ranks. Eli allowed himself a small smile as he watched them flee through his rifle scope. His father had been right. Sometimes the best way to kill something is to let it kill itself. By noon, the Germans knew they had a problem. Eli watched them from a ridge 200 yards north of his trap line, concealed in a thicket so dense he'd had to crawl through on his belly to reach it. They'd sent out 2 more patrols. Both had taken casualties. 1 man to position 3's bootlace trap, walked right into it while looking up at the trees, never saw the cord stretched across his path. 2 more to carefully aimed shots from positions the Germans couldn't locate, couldn't predict, couldn't counter. 7 dead by lunch, including the 2 from the morning patrol. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was in how they moved now. Slow, hesitant, bunched together instead of spread out in proper tactical formation, firing at shadows, wasting ammunition on trees that looked suspicious. Every rifle crack made them flinch. Every bird call made them stop and scan the forest. Fear was setting in, deeper than exhaustion, deeper than cold, the kind of fear that made men see ghosts. From his vantage point, Eli could see the German command post. A cluster of officers gathered around a map table under a camouflage net strung between trees. One of them was gesturing angrily, stabbing a finger at the forest, pointing at the map. The body language told him everything he needed to know. They thought they were facing a sniper team, maybe a whole squad, maybe more. Good. Let them think that. Let them hesitate. Let them waste time and bullets and nerve while Company K pulled back to safety. Eli ate a K-ration bar without tasting it, processed meat and crackers that tasted like cardboard, drank water from one canteen, careful to ration it, checked his ammunition by feel, counting each cartridge twice to be sure. 9 rounds fired today, 4 from his rifle, 5 from the bootlace traps that had used preloaded rounds from his reserves. 171 left. Enough for maybe 5 more days if he was careful. If he wasn't, maybe 2. He divided them mentally. 40 for tomorrow, 40 for the day after, 91 for emergencies. The math was brutal but necessary. He needed to be smarter. Conservation wasn't just about bullets anymore, it was about time, about making every shot count, about keeping the Germans so confused and so scared that they'd rather dig in than advance, about playing the long game. His father's voice echoed in his memory like a prayer. Patience, son, always patience. The trap does the work, you just set it right. Eli settled into the wet leaves and waited for the afternoon patrol. They came at 1400 hours, 12 men this time, a full squad, moving in a tactical formation with good spacing and better discipline. These weren't conscripts fresh from training. These were veterans. They'd seen combat before, probably the Eastern Front, maybe North Africa. They knew how to hunt snipers. They knew how to clear forest. They knew how to kill. But they didn't know about bootlaces. Eli watched them approach position 5 from 400 yards away, his breath steady, his heart rate controlled. He'd set that trap differently during the night. The bootlace wasn't stretched across the trail. Instead, he'd tied it to a deadfall log, balanced on a slope, held in place by friction and luck. When the Germans climbed over the log to avoid the obvious trail, their weight would shift it. The shift would pull the lace. The rifle would fire uphill into whoever was behind them. It was his father's wolf trap, modified for men. The Germans reached the log, paused, discussed in voices that carried through the still air. One of them pointed to the easier path around it through the brush, but the squad leader shook his head. Eli could see the gesture even from this distance. Too obvious, too easy, could be mined, could be booby-trapped. Better to go over the log, safer. They climbed over the log one by one, rifles ready. The deadfall shifted, just an inch, just enough. The lace pulled, the Springfield fired. A German sergeant took the round in the spine, the impact punching him forward. He dropped like a puppet with its strings cut, body already limp. The others scattered, diving for cover, screaming into their radios. Firing uphill, firing downhill, firing everywhere except where Eli actually was. He let them panic for 60 seconds, counted it out in his head, let the fear build, let them imagine snipers in every shadow. Then he fired once from position 6, 300 yards to their left. The round hit a tree 2 feet above one soldier's head. Bark exploded. Splinters flew. The soldier went flat, pressing himself into the mud. Now they were sure. Multiple snipers. Coordinated. Professional. Everywhere. The squad broke, fell back in disorder, leaving their dead, dragging their wounded, firing over their shoulders as they retreated. Eli counted. 11 confirmed casualties since dawn, and the day wasn't even half over. The Germans would think twice before sending more patrols. They'd call for artillery, call for reinforcements, call for anything except having to walk into these woods again. Oberst Klaus Dietrich received the reports at 1600 hours, standing in a commandeered farmhouse that smelled like damp stone and old smoke. 11 casualties since dawn. No confirmed enemy positions, no captured weapons, no prisoners, just bodies, and terrified soldiers babbling about ghosts in the forest, who shot from everywhere and nowhere, who set traps, who knew the forest better than God. His adjutant, a thin young man named Werner, stood at attention beside the map table, pencil poised over a notebook. "Sir, the men are saying there's a full sniper platoon out there. Maybe 15, maybe 20. They're using some kind of coordinated system we've never seen before. Automatic firing positions, remote triggers." Dietrich lit a cigarette with trembling hands. He hadn't slept in 30 hours. The attack that morning should have been easy. The Americans had retreated. The sector should have been clear. Push through, establish a defensive line, wait for the next wave. Simple, clean. But instead, his companies were bogged down by an enemy they couldn't see and couldn't kill. "Show me the casualty locations." Werner marked them on the map with a red grease pencil. 11 red circles, scattered across a 2-kilometer front. No pattern, no concentration, just random death falling from the trees like rain. "Tactical assessment?" Dietrich asked, though he already knew the answer. Sir, if they have 15 to 20 snipers in defensive positions, standard doctrine would be to call in artillery, saturate the entire sector, follow up with infantry once the positions are destroyed. Artillery is committed to the main offensive. We're not getting fire support for 3 days minimum. Division is clear on that. Then we need to commit at least 2 companies, overwhelm them with numbers, accept the casualties and push through. Dietrich stared at the map. 2 companies, 160 men. How many would die in those woods? 20? 30? 50? And for what? To take back a sector the Americans had already abandoned, to prove a point, to satisfy Division's demand for forward momentum. He drew on his cigarette, made a decision he knew would end his career, but might save his men's lives. Send out probing patrols tonight, light contact only. Tomorrow morning, we advance with 2 platoons, 80 men. Sweep the sector slowly. If we meet heavy resistance, we pull back and wait for artillery support. Sir, Division expects us to advance immediately. Division can go to hell. Dietrich's voice cracked. He was beyond caring about his career now, beyond caring about anything except the boys under his command. I'm not sending my men to die for empty forest. We advance carefully, or we don't advance at all. Those are the options. Werner hesitated, then nodded, saluted, left to relay the orders. Dietrich stood alone at the map table, staring at those 11 red circles, and wondered if he'd just saved his men or merely delayed the inevitable. In the forest, Eli Hargrove reset his traps and waited for night. The temperature dropped after sunset, plunging from cold to colder. Eli shivered in his hollow beneath the pine tree, wrapped in a shelter half that did nothing to stop the cold from seeping into his bones. His uniform was soaked through, had been for 2 days. The cold crept into his core, settled there like an old enemy. Montana winters had taught him how to function when his body wanted to shut down, how to keep moving when every muscle screamed for rest, how to survive when survival seemed impossible. He forced himself to chew another K-ration bar, though his stomach rebelled, forced water down a throat that didn't want it, checked his feet for trench foot in the darkness, feeling the skin with his fingers, pale, wrinkled, but not rotting yet, not infected, small victories in a war of attrition against his own body. He'd fired 6 rounds today, carefully aimed shots that had dropped 3 Germans and wounded 2 more. The bootlace traps had accounted for 3 additional kills. Total casualties for day 1, 11 confirmed dead, maybe 4 wounded, but the numbers didn't matter as much as the effect, the psychological impact, the fear. The Germans were scared now. He could see it in how they moved, hear it in their voices when they called to each other across the forest. They were starting to believe the woods themselves were hostile, that death waited behind every tree, that no place was safe. Good. Fear was a weapon, sometimes the best weapon, better than bullets because it never ran out. Eli pulled out his last bootlace, his own, from his left boot, ran it through his fingers in the darkness, thought about where to set the final trap. He had ammunition for 4 more days of careful shooting, but the bootlaces were almost gone, used up. After this one, he'd have to rely on straight shooting, on skill alone. Unless. He looked at his right boot in the darkness. The lace was worn but functional. If he took it, he'd have 2 more traps. But he'd also have boots that might fall off if he had to run. Boots that wouldn't stay on in mud, in combat. Risk versus reward. The eternal calculation. His father's voice again, clear as day. Sometimes you got to sacrifice something small to gain something big. Eli unlaced his right boot, pulled the cord free, coiled it carefully. 2 more traps. 2 more chances to kill Germans without exposing himself. 2 more opportunities to make them believe they were facing an army instead of 1 man. He allowed himself 4 hours of sleep that night, real sleep, the kind where dreams came and went like smoke. He dreamed of Montana, of his father's cabin, of trap lines running through snow so white it hurt to look at, the mountains clean and pure and uncomplicated. He dreamed of Alvin Makepeace, sitting across a fire, telling stories about Nebraska corn that grew taller than houses, about girls back home, about the life they'd build after the war, the life Alvin would never have. He dreamed of his mother, young and healthy, singing a song he couldn't quite remember, her voice like water over stones, her hands gentle. When he woke at 0300, the dreams faded like mist. Reality came back, cold and wet and hungry. He checked his rifles by feel in the darkness, repositioned to a new hide site. Never sleep where you fought, his father had taught him. Waited for dawn with boots held on by parachute cord, scavenged from his equipment. Day 2 was about to begin, and day 2 would be worse. For everyone. October 16th dawned grey and cold, the sky the colour of old iron. The Germans came at 0700 with 2 full platoons, 80 men, moving through the forest in a coordinated sweep, spread out in proper tactical formation. They'd learned from yesterday. Better spacing, better communication, officers walking among the ranks, keeping discipline tight, keeping fear in check. Eli watched them from a tree stand he'd constructed during the night, using parachute cord and branches. 20 feet up in an old oak, concealed by deadfall and Spanish moss. From here, he could see 300 yards in every direction, could watch them come, could choose his shots. They were being careful, smart, moving in bounds, one section advancing while another covered, then leapfrogging forward. Professional infantry work, the kind of tactics that kept men alive. But they were still following the trails, still walking where men naturally walked, still predictable in their unpredictability. Eli had spent the night setting his remaining traps along the most obvious routes through the forest. Bootlaces stretched across paths that looked safe. Positions selected not for where he could shoot from, but for where the Germans would naturally seek cover after the first shot. Now he waited, patient, still, a spider in a web of his own making. The first platoon reached position 2 at 0725. Eli fired once. A German corporal at the edge of the formation went down hard, clutching his throat. The others dove for cover behind a fallen log, exactly where Eli knew they would, exactly where he'd set the trap. The log looked perfect. Solid cover, protection from fire. 3 men went over the log, seeking safety. The bootlace pulled. The rifle fired point blank into the group. 2 men fell, bodies jerking. The third scrambled away, screaming, unhit but broken. The Germans panicked, fired wildly into the trees, advanced on position 2, thinking they'd found the sniper, found only an empty rifle and another bootlace, found proof that they were being hunted by something that thought 3 steps ahead. While they were investigating, Eli fired from position 4, 200 yards to their right. The round hit a German officer in the leg, a wounding shot, deliberate. Wounded men required 3 more men to carry them. 1 casualty became 4 men out of the fight. Now the Germans thought there were snipers on both flanks, thought they were surrounded, thought they were walking into a killing field. They pulled back, regrouped, sent runners back to their commanders, wasted precious time being careful while Company K got farther away. By 0900, the Germans had lost 8 men. By noon on day 2, the total count had reached 18 dead, 11 more since dawn. Eli was everywhere and nowhere, shooting, moving, triggering traps, disappearing before the Germans could zero in on his position. He was running on adrenaline and muscle memory now. His hands worked the rifle automatically. Load, aim, fire, move. His feet found purchase on wet leaves without conscious thought. His eyes calculated distances, wind, trajectory without deliberate effort. He'd become part of the forest, an extension of it. The Germans were just visitors, and visitors died. At 1300 hours, the second platoon tried to flank him. 20 men sent in a wide arc to the south, hoping to catch him from behind. But Eli had been running trap lines since he was 12. He knew how predators thought, how they circled, how they tried to outsmart their prey. His father had taught him to think like a wolf, to anticipate, to be 3 steps ahead. He let them come. Let them think they'd found a route through. Let them believe they were being clever. Then he hit them from above with his last bootlace trap, positioned in a tree where no one thought to look. The rifle fired down into their formation at a 45-degree angle. 1 dead instantly, 2 wounded badly enough to need evacuation. The platoon broke, turned back, retreated without orders. Eli fired twice more as they fled, dropped one, wounded another, let the rest run so they could spread more fear, so they could tell stories about snipers in the trees, about death from above, about a forest that wanted German blood. By 1600 hours, the Germans were done for the day. They pulled back to their start line. 33 casualties total on day 2, 22 killed, 11 wounded. The forest floor was painted red. The trees held the smell of cordite and blood and fear. It hung in the air like fog. And somewhere in those woods, a sniper they couldn't find kept hunting. Dietrich received the casualty report at his command post, read it 3 times, hoping the numbers would change. They didn't. 33 casualties in one day, sir, Werner reported. His voice was hollow. Multiple sniper positions, coordinated fire, automated traps. They're systematically destroying every patrol we send in. How many snipers? Dietrich's voice was barely a whisper. Estimates range from 12 to 20, sir. Some of the men are saying there's more. They're reporting automatic weapons fire from positions we know we cleared. They're reporting shots from impossible angles, from trees, from underground. Sir, the men are starting to believe the forest itself is shooting at them. Dietrich knew what that meant. His men were seeing ghosts. Fear was contagious. It spread faster than any bullet, faster than any disease. And once it took hold, it was almost impossible to stop. Pull everyone back. Set a defensive perimeter. No more patrols today. Sir, Division is demanding we advance. Division isn't here watching boys die in the mud. Dietrich's voice cracked. He slammed his fist on the table, making the map jump. Tell Division we've encountered a fortified American position with significant sniper support. Tell them we need artillery or air support, or we need to wait them out. Those are the options. I will not send more men to die for trees. Werner hesitated, then nodded, saluted, left to send the message that would probably get them both court-martialed. Dietrich sat down heavily on an ammunition crate, lit another cigarette with hands that shook so badly he needed 3 matches, stared at the map where red circles now clustered like drops of blood spilled on paper. 42 Germans in 2 days. 42 sons who wouldn't go home. 42 families who would receive telegrams. 42 graves that would need digging. And whoever was out there in the forest was still alive, still waiting, still killing. That night, Dietrich did something he hadn't done since Stalingrad. He wrote a letter to his wife. Not the sanitized, censored kind they all sent home, a real letter, honest, desperate. Marta, he wrote by candlelight, hand shaking. I am fighting ghosts. Not Russians, not Americans, ghosts who kill my men from everywhere and nowhere. I have lost 42 soldiers to an enemy I cannot see, cannot find, cannot kill. They use traps, automated weapons, tactics I've never encountered in 6 years of war. If I do not pull back, I will lose them all. Division will call it cowardice. History may call it failure. But I cannot send more boys to die for empty forest. I cannot be the man who sacrifices children for pride. Forgive me if I fail. Forgive me if I survive when better men don't. But know that I tried to save them. God help me, I tried. He sealed the letter. Knew it would never reach her. Censors would intercept it. Someone would read about his doubt, his fear, his weakness. His career was over. But his men might live. In the morning, he would give the order for one final push. And after that, if they couldn't break through, he would retreat. Court-martial be damned. Some things were worth more than medals. Night 2 nearly broke Eli. He huddled in a ravine, shaking so hard his teeth clicked together like castanets. The adrenaline had worn off. The cold had seeped into his core. His hands trembled when he tried to hold his rifle. His vision blurred at the edges. His thoughts came slow, like wading through mud. He'd eaten his last K-ration at sunset, drank the last of his water an hour ago. The canteens were empty. His ammunition was down to 137 rounds. 34 fired today, more than he'd planned. He'd gotten careless with his shooting in the afternoon when exhaustion made his hands shake, when the cold made his fingers numb. He tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces. German boys, younger than him, dying in the mud, their eyes open, accusing, asking why. The rational part of his brain knew they would have killed him without hesitation, would have killed every American soldier they could find, would have invaded countries and murdered civilians and followed orders no matter how evil. This was war. This was survival. This was necessary. But the human part of his brain kept counting, kept seeing faces, kept hearing screams. 42. 42 men dead because of him. "Stop it," he whispered to himself in the darkness. "Stop thinking. Just breathe. Just survive one more day, just one more." But the faces kept coming, and the counting never stopped. Around midnight, the hallucination started. He saw his father standing between the trees. Nathaniel Hargrove, wearing his old trapping coat, carrying the Winchester that had been Eli's first rifle. As real as anything, as solid as the trees. "You doing good, son?" his father said, voice clear as day. "Staying patient, staying smart, making your shots count." "Dad, I'm so tired. I don't know if I can do another day." "I know, but tired don't mean quit. Tired just means you got to dig deeper. Find that last bit of strength you didn't know you had." "I've killed so many. Does it ever stop? The counting?" His father smiled, the same quiet smile Eli remembered from childhood, the smile that said everything would be okay, even when it wouldn't. "You've saved more than you've killed. Every German you stop here is one that can't shoot your friends, one that can't advance, one that can't win. You remember that. You're buying time with other men's lives. That's what soldiers do. That's what heroes do, even when it hurts." "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a killer." "Sometimes they're the same thing, son. Sometimes the only difference is which side you're on." Eli blinked. His father was gone. Just trees, just darkness, just the rain that never stopped falling. He sat up, forced himself to move, checked his rifles by feel in the darkness, made sure the actions were clear, counted his remaining ammunition one more time, touching each cartridge like a prayer. 137 rounds. Enough for one more day if he was careful, if he was perfect, if he didn't miss. One more day, just one more day. Then Company K would come back. Then he could rest. Then he could close his eyes and sleep for a week and never think about the Hurtgen forest again. Never count faces. Never hear screams. He pulled his collar tight against the rain and waited for dawn. The third day was about to begin, and the third day would end it all, one way or another. October 17th, 0600 hours. The Germans came with everything they had left. 120 men. Every soldier who could carry a rifle, walking wounded included. They'd been given a simple order by division: take the sector or don't come back. Succeed or die trying. No middle ground, no excuses. Dietrich stood at the edge of the forest, watching his companies form up in the grey dawn light. He'd argued against this, begged for more time, for artillery support, for airstrikes, for anything except sending more men into the meat grinder. But division had spoken, and soldiers obeyed, even when orders were suicide. He gave the order to advance. The forest swallowed them whole, like a mouth closing. Eli saw them coming from his position in the oak tree, still 20 feet up, still concealed by branches and Spanish moss. 100 men, maybe more, moving in a massed formation, sacrificing stealth for mutual support. They were done being cautious, done being afraid, done losing. Now they were just angry, desperate, determined to end this. And angry men made mistakes, desperate men made more. He let them get close, 200 yards, 150, 100. Let them commit. Let them believe they could win through sheer force of numbers. Then he fired. A German officer went down, the one shouting orders, the one holding the formation together, the one keeping discipline in check. The leader. Always take out the leader first. That's what his father had taught him. Wolf packs fall apart when the alpha dies. For a moment, the advance faltered. Men looked at each other, looked at their dead officer, wondered who was in charge now. Then someone screamed an order and they charged. They came like a wave through the trees, firing from the hip, throwing grenades that exploded in showers of dirt and shrapnel. A tsunami of grey-green uniforms and raw aggression. They'd stopped trying to be smart. Now they were just trying to kill whatever was killing them, trying to end the nightmare through violence. Eli fired twice more, dropped 2 men, slid down from the tree using the rope he prepared during the night, and ran. Behind him, the Germans poured fire into the oak, shredded the branches, turned the trunk into splinters, killed the empty space where he'd been. But Eli was already gone, already repositioning, already preparing the next shot. He fell back to position 7, a rocky outcrop with good cover and better sightlines, took position behind a boulder, waited for them to follow, controlled his breathing, counted his remaining rounds. 135 left. Make every shot count, every single shot. They came in a rush, 30, 40, 50 men, bunched together, exposing themselves, abandoning tactics for momentum. Eli fired methodically. 1 round, 1 German down, shift position, fire again, another German, shift again. Never stay in one place, never give them a target, just keep moving, keep shooting, keep them confused about where he was, how many there were. Around 0900, a squad tried to flank him from the south, walked straight into position 3, where one of his spent traps lay dormant. But they didn't know it was spent. They saw the rifle, the bootlace, panicked, fired at nothing, wasted ammunition and nerve on ghosts. Eli used the distraction to reposition north, found high ground, set up behind a fallen log thick enough to stop bullets. The Germans kept coming, like waves against rocks, relentless, exhausted, dying by 1s and 2s but never stopping, never breaking, driven forward by orders and fear and the knowledge that retreat meant court-martial. The forest exploded around them, not from artillery, from panic. 120 men firing at shadows, at movement, at the spaces between trees. The noise was physical, pressed against eardrums, made the air itself vibrate. Cordite smoke so thick Eli could taste it, bitter, chemical, burning his throat with every breath, and underneath all of it, screaming, German voices, high, desperate, afraid. By 1100 hours, Eli had fired his last preloaded magazine. The rifle clicked empty. He dropped it, picked up the second Springfield, 43 rounds left loose in his pack, emergency reserves he'd hoped never to touch. Loaded them one at a time, hands shaking. The Germans kept coming but slower now, fewer, broken into small groups, lost in the smoke and confusion, shooting at each other in the chaos, friendly fire taking as many as Eli's rifle. And then, at 11:30, a radio crackled in the German command post 300 yards away. Dietrich's voice, hoarse and broken. All units, cease advance, fall back to start line. Repeat, fall back to start line. Retrieve wounded and retreat. This is not a request, this is an order. Fall back, now. The order spread through the forest like wildfire. The shooting stopped, the advance halted. The Germans began to retreat, slowly at first, then faster, then running, carrying their wounded, dragging their dead when they could, leaving others behind when they couldn't, a rout disguised as tactical withdrawal. By noon, the forest was silent except for the moaning of wounded men and the cries of crows circling overhead. Eli stayed hidden until 1400 hours, didn't trust the silence, didn't trust that they were really gone. He'd seen men fake retreats before, seen them pull back and then ambush anyone who emerged from cover. So he waited, patient even in victory, patient even in exhaustion. At 1400, he finally crawled out of his hide site, stood on shaking legs, every muscle screamed, his vision swam, his hands were torn and bleeding from 3 days of crawling through thorns. His uniform was more mud than cloth. His boots were held on by cord and hope. But he was alive. He'd held the sector for 72 hours. He'd killed 64 Germans, maybe more. He'd stopped counting after the chaos of the final assault. The number didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the mission. Company K would be safe. Battalion would have time to regroup. Men who might have died would live to fight another day. Eli looked at his empty hands. no rifle within reach, no ammunition left except the 43 emergency rounds, no bootlaces left to set traps. He had nothing but a knife and the knowledge that he'd survived something impossible. He sat down heavily against a tree, tilted his face toward the sky, where pale sunlight was trying to break through the clouds. Let the rain wash the blood from his hands. Let it wash the cordite from his face. Let it wash 3 days of death into the mud where it belonged. And waited for his brothers to come home. Waited to stop being a ghost. Waited to be human again. The rain stopped on the morning of October 18th. For the first time in 5 days, pale sunlight broke through the canopy in shafts of gold that looked like something from a church. Steam rose from the wet earth. The forest smelled like decay and rebirth all at once. Rotting leaves and fresh rain and the iron tang of blood that would take weeks to fade. Elijah Hargrove sat with his back against an oak tree, knife resting across his knees, watching the light move through the branches like a living thing. He'd been sitting there since dawn, not moving, barely breathing, just existing in the space between exhaustion and collapse, between soldier and human. His body had given everything it had. Now it was asking for payment he couldn't afford. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, his vision blurred at the edges like looking through dirty glass. Every breath felt like work. The cold had settled so deep into his bones that he wondered if he'd ever be warm again. If Montana summers would ever feel hot. If anything would ever feel normal. But he was alive. 72 hours. He'd promised them 72 hours. He'd delivered 72 hours of hell for the Germans, 72 hours of survival for himself, 72 hours that had aged him 10 years. The first sound of Company K came at 08:15. Bootsteps in the distance, lots of them. The distinctive jingle of American equipment, canteens and grenades and metal clips, voices calling out in English. Careful, professional, men who'd learned to move through hostile territory without dying. Eli tried to stand, his legs buckled like a newborn colt's. He caught himself against the tree, forced himself upright through sheer willpower and stubbornness. Montana stubbornness. Hargrove stubbornness. The kind that kept you going when everything said stop. A voice cut through the forest, amplified by cupped hands. "Hargrove! Elijah Hargrove! If you're out here, sound off!" "We're coming in!" Captain Thaddeus Boone. Eli opened his mouth. No sound came out. His throat was too dry, too raw from 3 days of silence and fear and breathing cordite smoke. He tried again, nothing but a croak. He swallowed, tried a third time. "Here!" The word cracked through the forest like a gunshot, like a prayer answered, like proof of life. 30 seconds later they found him. Boone came through the trees first, rifle up, eyes scanning for threats. Still wearing the same mud-caked uniform from 3 days ago, still carrying the same map case, still alive when so many weren't. But his eyes were different now, older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep, the kind of tired that came from sending men to die and living with it afterward. He stopped 10 feet away, stared at Eli like he was seeing a ghost, like he couldn't believe what his eyes were telling him. "Hargrove. Sir, you're alive." "Yes, sir, surprised as you are." Boone's jaw worked. He looked around at the forest, at the spent rifle casings glinting in the new sunlight like brass flowers, at the bootlace still tied to a tree, brown and frayed, at the blood staining the leaves, at the evidence of 3 days of methodical killing. "The Germans, they retreated yesterday, pulled back in complete disorder. We monitored their radio traffic. They were terrified." "Yes, sir, around noon." "Did you—" Boone stopped, started again. "How many men were out here with you? We need to account for everyone, need to recover bodies if—" "Just me, sir." Silence, long and heavy, the kind of silence that follows impossible statements. Behind Boone, other soldiers emerged from the trees, young faces, old eyes. They spread out slowly, rifles ready, checking corners and shadows, looking for the sniper platoon that had held this sector for 3 days, looking for 15 or 20 men who'd killed 64 Germans, looking for ghosts that didn't exist. One of them called out from 50 yards away, "Captain, got bodies over here. Jesus Christ, there's There's a lot of them. Sir, you need to see this. Another voice farther away. More here, sir. They're everywhere. A third voice, shaking. Found a rifle rigged with some kind of trap. Bootlace tied to the trigger. What the hell? Boone didn't take his eyes off Eli. How many, Hargrove? How many Germans? I stopped counting after 42, sir. Gave up trying to track after that. Things got confused during the final assault this morning. You stopped counting? Boone's voice was flat, disbelieving, processing information that didn't make sense. Because there were too many. Yes, sir. And you were alone. No backup, no support, no one helping you. Yes, sir, from the start. Boone walked closer, extended his hand, not for a handshake, for support, to help. Eli took it, and the captain hauled him to his feet, held him steady when his legs threatened to quit, kept him upright through strength of grip alone. Can you walk? If I have to, sir. Good, because you need to show me what you did here. You need to show me how one man killed 64 Germans and lived to tell about it. They walked the sector together, Boone and Eli and a squad of infantry who couldn't quite believe what they were seeing, what their eyes were telling them, what the evidence proved. Position 1. The fallen oak with a Springfield wedged in the rotting wood, bootlace still tied to the trigger, stretched back to a sapling that had been cut free after the trap sprung. 3 German bodies lay nearby, already starting to bloat in the autumn warmth. Flies were gathering despite the cold. Automatic trigger, Eli said. His voice was hoarse, distant, like he was describing something that happened to someone else, something from a dream. Germans walk down the trail, hit the lace, rifle fires itself. They think there's a shooter in that position, multiple shooters actually, but I'm already somewhere else, watching, waiting. Boone knelt beside the rifle, examined the setup like an archaeologist studying ancient ruins, ran the bootlace through his fingers, tested the tension, worked through the mechanics in his head. Where did you learn this? Montana. My father taught me how to trap animals when I was 12. This isn't that different. Wolves, coyotes, Germans, all predictable if you understand how they think, how they move. And you set these up, alone, in the dark. Yes, sir, first night. Used Alvin's bootlaces, the ones from his boots. Boone closed his eyes briefly. Private makepeace. Yes, sir. Found him where he fell. Took his laces, used them to kill the men who killed him. Seemed right. Seemed like what he'd want. They moved to position 2, position 3. Each one the same story. A rifle, a bootlace, a trap that had killed men who never saw it coming, who never understood what was happening until it was too late. At position 5, they found the deadfall log. A German sergeant lay beneath it, spine broken, body already stiff. The bootlace was still wrapped around the log's base. One of the soldiers, a kid from Ohio named Patterson, threw up in the bushes. The sound was loud in the silence. Embarrassing. Human. Boone just stared. How many of these did you set? 8 total. Used all my bootlaces. Alvin's laces. My own. Eli pointed at his boots. They were tied with strips of parachute cord now. Field expedient. Improvised. Ran out on the 3rd day. Had to shoot straight after that. No more tricks. Just patience and aim. You ran out of bootlaces. Boone said it slowly, testing the words in his mouth, making sure they were real. So you just shot them until you ran out of ammunition, until they retreated. Yes, sir. 137 rounds fired over 3 days, 43 left in reserve. Never needed them. They broke before I did. Boone did the math in his head. His face went pale. He sat down heavily on a log. You fired 137 rounds in 3 days and killed 64 confirmed, sir. A sergeant from battalion intelligence had appeared, materializing like smoke. He was holding a notebook, tallying numbers as they found bodies, making it official, making it real. We're still counting wounded that died overnight, but 64 are definitely KIA, maybe more scattered farther out that we haven't found yet. Sir, I've never seen anything like this, never even heard of it. Boone looked at Eli like he'd never seen him before, like he was meeting him for the first time. One man, bootlaces and a trapper's knowledge, 64 dead Germans. 200 more so scared they refused to fight. An entire battalion delayed for 3 days. They thought there were more of us, sir. That's what mattered. 15, 20 snipers. That's what their commander reported. They hesitated, wasted time, gave you 3 days to pull back and regroup. That was the mission. 3 days, Boone's voice cracked. You held this sector alone for 3 days against 200 Germans and killed 64 of them with bootlaces and patience and sheer stubborn will. Eli shrugged. It hurt. Everything hurt. My father always said, patience beats speed. Said the trap does the work, you just set it right. I just did what he taught me, what Montana taught me. Patterson came back from the bushes, wiping his mouth with a shaking hand. He looked at Eli with something between awe and fear, like looking at something not quite human. Sir, the kid said quietly, what are we supposed to call this? A battle? A stand? A massacre? I don't even know what word fits. Boone folded his map, tucked it in his jacket, looked at Eli for a long time. We call it survival, Patterson. We call it one soldier doing the impossible because someone had to. We call it proof that sometimes the quietest men win the loudest victories. He put a hand on Eli's shoulder, squeezed once. Come on, Hargrove, let's get you out of here. You've earned your hot meal and warm bunk. Hell, you've earned a lot more than that. A lot more than we can ever give you. They walked back toward friendly lines together. Behind them, the forest kept its secrets. And somewhere in those trees, 64 Germans would lie forever, killed by a trapper's son who'd learned his lessons well, who'd turned war into hunting, who'd survived the impossible. The battalion aid station was a tent complex 2 miles behind the line, marked with red crosses that looked like blood in the afternoon light. Eli sat on a cot while a medic worked on him. The man was 40, too old for combat, perfect for patching up soldiers who'd pushed themselves beyond human limits. Severe dehydration. The medic called out symptoms as he worked, narrating for the record. Hypothermia, multiple contusions and lacerations, probable malnutrition, signs of shock, early trench foot. This man should be evacuated to a field hospital immediately. Negative. Eli's voice was firm despite the shaking, despite the way his hands trembled. I'm staying with my company. I'm not going anywhere. The medic looked at Captain Boone, who stood nearby watching. Boone nodded. Give him what he needs to function. Stabilize him, but he stays with us. They pumped 2 liters of saline into Eli's veins through an IV that hurt going in, fed him hot broth that he could barely keep down, stomach rebelling, wrapped him in 3 wool blankets that smelled like other men's sweat, and let him sleep for 16 hours straight in a tent that smelled like antiseptic and blood and suffering. When he woke, there was a man sitting beside his cot, not a soldier, a civilian in a correspondent's uniform, notebook, camera, press credentials hanging from his neck, the eager look of someone hunting for a story. Private First Class Hargrove? The man extended his hand like they were at a cocktail party. I'm Robert Crenshaw, Stars and Stripes. I heard you just did something remarkable out there, something that needs to be told. I'd love to talk to you about... No. I'm sorry? No interview, no story, no photographs, nothing. Crenshaw blinked, smiled like Eli had made a joke. Son, do you understand what you did? You held off an entire German battalion alone. You killed 64 men using bootlaces and patience. This is exactly the kind of story that gets men killed. Eli sat up slowly. The tent spun, his stomach rolled. You write about bootlace traps. Germans start checking for bootlace traps. You write about one man holding a sector. Germans start assuming one man can't do it and push harder next time. You write about me. Maybe some other soldier tries the same thing and dies because he doesn't have my training, doesn't have my father's lessons. But the American people need to hear. The American people need to win this war, not read about me. Eli lay back down, closed his eyes. Find a different story, Mr. Crenshaw. This one's not for sale. This one's not for glory. This one stays here. The correspondent left, disappointed, empty-handed, angry at having wasted time on an ungrateful soldier. Boone watched him go, then looked at Eli with something like respect, something like understanding. You know, Division wants to put you in for a bronze star, maybe a silver star. You saved a lot of lives out there, bought us time we desperately needed. Give it to Makepeace's family, sir. Alvin's dead, Hargrove. The medal should go to you. I know he's dead, sir, but he died buying time for the company to retreat. He deserves the medal. I just finished what he started. I just did the job we both signed up for. Boone was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll see what I can do. Can't promise anything, but I'll try. He turned to leave. Stopped. Hargrove, what you did out there, that's not going to go away. You know that, right? It's going to follow you. Men are already talking. Word spreads. You're going to be the guy who held the Hurtgen alone, the ghost sniper, the legend. Eli closed his eyes. It already is, sir. It's already following me. I can still see their faces. All 64. I can still hear them. That's not going away. Ever. No, Boone said quietly. No, it's not. Welcome to the club nobody wants to join. The German side of the story took longer to emerge, longer to surface, longer to become real. Oberst Klaus Dietrich filed his after-action report on October 19th, sitting in a commandeered farmhouse 20 kilometers from where his men had died. His hands shook as he wrote, not from cold, but from something deeper, from something that had broken inside during those 3 days. The report was clinical, professional, exactly what German military doctrine required. Devoid of emotion, full of tactical assessment. Subject: Engagement, Hurtgen Forest Sector 7, October 15th to 17th, 1944. Summary: Attempted advance through American-held sector met with sustained resistance from enemy sniper platoon. Estimated strength 15 to 20 specialized marksmen, utilizing coordinated ambush tactics and automated firing positions of unprecedented sophistication. Casualties: 64 KIA, 31 WIA, 12 missing, presumed dead. Assessment: Enemy has established fortified defensive network with overlapping fields of fire and mechanical trap systems. Positions cannot be flanked. Automated weapons continue firing after positions are cleared. Recommend artillery preparation, minimum 500 rounds, before further advance. Sector is not viable for infantry assault without significant support. Request air reconnaissance to identify enemy positions and strength. He signed it with a hand that shook, sealed it in an envelope, sent it up the chain of command where it would be read by men who'd never seen the Hurtgen, never smelled the fear, never counted bodies. The report was filed, forgotten, lost in the chaos of a war that Germany was rapidly losing. It would stay lost for 45 years, buried in archives, gathering dust, until a historian with too much time found it and connected the dots. The war ended for Elijah Hargrove on May 8, 1945. He was in Bavaria when the announcement came over the radio. Germany had surrendered. The European theatre was over. Done. Finished. Men cheered, fired their rifles into the air, drank liberated German beer and sang songs about going home, about sweethearts waiting, about lives that could finally start. Eli sat alone in a barn, cleaning the Springfield that had carried him through France and Germany and 100 battles he'd tried to forget. The oil smelled like metal and memory. He didn't feel victorious. He felt tired, hollow, empty in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. 2 weeks later, he boarded a transport ship in Le Havre, crossed the Atlantic with 5,000 other soldiers who'd survived and now had to figure out how to live. The ocean was grey and endless. The ship smelled like diesel and vomit and hope mixed with uncertainty. He stood at the rail one evening, watching the sunset paint the water red, blood red, the colour of everything now, and thought about Alvin Makepeace, about the 64 Germans in the Hurtgen, about all the faces he'd seen through his rifle scope, the ones that haunted his dreams. A chaplain appeared beside him, young, earnest, probably fresh from seminary, still believed God cared about individual soldiers. "Beautiful evening," the chaplain said, leaning on the rail. Eli said nothing. You did good over there, whatever you did. You helped end this thing. That matters. That means something. Does it? I believe it does. I believe every life saved, every day bought, every... Chaplain. Eli's voice was quiet, flat, dead. I killed 64 men in 3 days, maybe more. I watched them die, watched them bleed out in the mud calling for their mothers. Some of them were kids, younger than me, conscripts who didn't want to be there any more than I did.
But I feel nothing about it. Not guilt, not pride,
Nothing, just empty. What does that make me? The chaplain was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had lost its earnestness, had found something more real underneath. It makes you a soldier. And soldiers carry things civilians can't understand. But you're going home now. You get to put it down. You get to be someone else, someone new. And if I can't? Then you find someone who can help you remember who you were before the war, before the killing. That person is still in there somewhere. You just have to find him again. The chaplain left. Eli stayed at the rail until the sun disappeared and the stars came out. Cold, bright, indifferent to human suffering. The same stars that shone over Montana, over the Hurtgen, over everything. He thought about Montana, about his father, about trap lines running through snow, about a life that seemed impossibly far away, about whether he could ever go back to it, whether that person still existed, about whether Elijah Hargrove, the trapper's son, could live alongside Elijah Hargrove, the ghost sniper, about whether peace was even possible anymore. Absaroka County, Montana, summer 1945. The cabin looked exactly the same, like time had stopped, like the war had never happened anywhere except in Eli's head. Eli stood at the end of the dirt road, duffel bag over his shoulder, staring at the place he'd grown up. Same log walls weathered grey, same stone chimney with smoke rising, same creek running past the side yard, making the sound he'd fallen asleep to for 18 years. A sound that meant home, that meant safety. His father was sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of wood, just like he'd been doing the day Eli left for the war. Nathaniel Hargrove hadn't changed much. A little greyer, a little thinner, lines deeper around his eyes, but still solid, still there, still real. He stood when he saw Eli, didn't run,
didn't shout, just stood and waited while his son walked the last 100 yards home, the longest 100 yards of Eli's life. They met at the porch steps. Nathaniel looked at his boy, at the shadows under his eyes, at the way he held himself, coiled and ready for threats that didn't exist, at the 1,000-yard stare that every combat soldier brought home from Europe, at the son who'd left and the stranger who'd returned. "You made it," Nathaniel said simply. "I made it." "You okay?" "I don't know yet. Ask me in a year." Nathaniel nodded, like that was the most honest answer he'd heard in a long time, like honesty mattered more than optimism. "Well, come on inside. Coffee's hot. Stew's on the stove. You can tell me what you're ready to tell me. The rest can wait. The rest can wait forever if it needs to." They went inside. The cabin smelled like pine smoke and leather and coffee, like home, like memory, like everything Eli had fought to get back to. Eli sat at the kitchen table where he'd eaten 10,000 meals. His father poured coffee into chipped mugs, set out bowls of elk stew that smelled like childhood. They ate in silence for a while, comfortable silence, the kind that comes from knowing someone your whole life. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. "You use what I taught you over there?" "Every day, every hour." "It help?" "Kept me alive. Kept other men alive too. Maybe hundreds, maybe more. Hard to say." "Good," Nathaniel stirred his coffee. "That's what knowledge is for, keeping people alive, teaching them how to survive when everything wants them dead." Eli set down his spoon, looked at his father, really looked. "I killed a lot of men, Dad. A lot. Using traps like you showed me. Bootlaces, patience, everything you taught me. I turned your lessons into weapons, into death. You feel bad about it?" "I don't feel anything about it. That's what scares me. I see their faces, I count them.
64 faces I can't forget.
But I don't feel guilt. Don't feel pride. Just nothing. Just empty.
Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, set down his own spoon, reached across the table, gripped his son's shoulder with a hand that had known work and hardship and survival. You did what you had to do. To survive. To protect your brothers. That's not murder, Eli. That's war. And war don't care about your feelings. It just cares if you wake up the next morning. If you come home. If you live. How do I live with it? How do I move forward? Same way you live with anything. One day at a time. You work, you move, you find something worth living for, something worth building. And eventually, the weight gets lighter. Maybe not gone, never gone probably, but lighter, bearable. Eli nodded, didn't trust his voice to speak, felt tears on his face for the first time since Alvin died. They finished their meal in silence, washed the dishes together, and for the first time since leaving the Hurtgen forest, Eli felt like maybe, just maybe, he could breathe again. Like maybe he could find his way back to being human. Like maybe home still meant something after all. He became a game warden in 1946. It made sense. Perfect sense. He knew the mountains, knew the animals, knew how to track and survive and read the forest like a book written in a language only a few could understand. The Montana Fish and Game Department hired him without hesitation, gave him a truck, a rifle, and 3,000 square miles of wilderness to protect. He was good at it, quiet, competent, fair but firm. He stopped poachers with words first, force second, managed wolf populations scientifically, taught young hunters about ethical kills and clean shots and respecting what you took, lived in a ranger station on the edge of Custer National Forest, where the only sounds were wind and water and the occasional elk bugle echoing through valleys. It was peaceful. It was exactly what he needed. It was healing without calling it that. In 1947, he met Lorraine Whitaker at a church social in Fishtail. She was a teacher at the one-room schoolhouse. 24 years old, dark hair pulled back practical, hands that knew work, eyes that saw things others missed. She didn't ask him about the war, didn't push him to talk about things he wasn't ready to say, didn't treat him like he was broken, just accepted him as he was, quiet, careful, carrying weight she couldn't see but somehow understood. She just accepted him. They married in the fall, small ceremony, her family, his father, a handful of friends from town, simple vows in a church that smelled like old wood and new beginnings. They built a life together in the mountains, had 3 sons, William, Thomas, James. Raised them to respect the forest, taught them to shoot and fish, and understand that taking a life, even an animal's, meant something. That violence had weight. That killing wasn't casual. Eli never told them about the war, never mentioned the Hurtgen, never spoke Alvin Makepeace's name out loud. Lorraine asked once, early in their marriage, if he wanted to talk about it, about what he'd done, what he'd seen. He'd said no. Said it quiet but firm. She never asked again. That was love. That was understanding. The years passed. The 50s became the 60s, became the 70s. His sons grew up, moved away to college, to jobs, to cities, started families of their own, came back to visit, but lived elsewhere. That was okay. That was right. Nathaniel died in 1968, quietly, in his sleep, in the cabin where he'd raised Eli. Eli buried him on the ridge overlooking the valley, under a pine tree where they'd checked trap lines together 1,000 times. Life moved forward the way it does, whether you're ready or not. The war became something that happened to someone else, something distant, something that belonged to a different Eli Hargrove, who died in the Hurtgen and been replaced by someone quieter, someone careful, someone who understood that survival was the only real victory. Almost forgotten, almost buried. 1994, summer. July heat making the air shimmer. Eli was 74 years old now, retired for 8 years, living in the same ranger station he'd occupied for 40 years. The state had tried to move him twice, but he'd refused. This was home. This was his. The rain had passed 3 years earlier. Cancer, quick and cruel. 6 weeks from diagnosis to grave. His sons visited when they could, but they had their own lives, their own families, their own struggles. That was okay. That was how it should be. He spent his days walking the forest, checking the same trails he'd walked as a boy, thinking about the past more than the present, feeling old, feeling tired, feeling like his time was running out.
One afternoon in late July, his grandson came to visit. Nathan was 12, skinny, curious, wore glasses too big for his face, the kind of kid who asked 10,000 questions and actually listened to the answers, who wanted to understand everything. He'd been staying at the ranger station for a week, learning to fish, learning to track, soaking up his grandfather's knowledge like a sponge. On the last day, Nathan went exploring in the attic, while Eli dozed on the porch. He came down an hour later holding a pair of boots, old combat boots, worn, cracked, still caked with 49-year-old mud from a forest in Germany. "Grandpa?" Nathan's voice was uncertain, careful. "Why don't these boots have laces?" Eli looked up from the book he'd been pretending to read, saw the boots in his grandson's hands, felt something shift in his chest, something he'd kept locked away for half a century trying to escape. For 49 years, he'd kept those boots in the attic. Hadn't looked at them, hadn't touched them, couldn't throw them away, couldn't explain why, just kept them because throwing them away felt wrong, felt like betrayal. Now here they were, in a child's hands, asking questions he'd never answered, questions he'd promised himself he'd never answer. "Come, sit down, Nathan." The boy sat on the porch steps, held the boots carefully, respectfully. Eli took the boots, ran his fingers over the empty eyelets where laces should have been, felt 49 years of silence pressing on him, felt the weight of stories untold, of ghosts unacknowledged. "These boots belong to my best friend," he said slowly, each word careful, measured. His name was Alvin Makepeace. He died in Germany during the war, died saving other men, buying them time to escape. He was 22. He was the best man I ever knew. "What happened to the laces?" "I used them, for traps, for survival, for killing." Nathan's eyes went wide behind his glasses. "You used them to kill people?" Eli was quiet for a long moment, deciding, weighing, wondering if a 12-year-old could understand, wondering if he wanted to put this weight on anyone else, wondering if silence was still the right choice after half a century. But Nathan was looking at him with his mother's eyes, Lorraine's eyes, patient, accepting, ready to listen, ready to understand. So Eli told him, not everything, not the faces, not the blood, not the nights when he'd shaken so hard he thought he'd come apart, not the screams, not the counting, not the full weight of 64 lives ended. But he told him about the forest, about being alone, about bootlaces tied to triggers, about patience and traps and survival, about 64 Germans who never went home, about 3 days that saved hundreds of American lives, about doing what had to be done with the tools you had, about turning your father's lessons into weapons because that's what survival demanded. When he finished, Nathan was quiet for a long time, turning it over in his mind, processing. "So you saved all those soldiers," the boy said finally. "With Mr. Makepeace's bootlaces, you saved them by killing." "I tried. I hope I did. I'll never know for sure, but I hope so." "Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Why keep it secret?" Eli smiled, sad, tired, old. "Because some things aren't for telling, Nathan. Some things you carry quiet. You do what needs doing, and then you come home and you live. You don't brag. You don't make yourself a hero. You just keep going. You build a life. You help people when you can. You try to be good even though you've done terrible things. That's all any of us can do." Nathan held up the boots. "Can I keep these? To remember? To understand?" "No, son. Those stay with me. They're my burden, my reminder." Eli stood slowly, joints creaking, walked to a cabinet inside, pulled out a small wooden box he'd made himself 20 years ago. Inside were 4 bootlaces, brown, frayed, stained with things that didn't wash out, stained with memory and death and survival. "These are the ones I used," Eli said, his voice rough. "When I'm gone, not today, not tomorrow, but someday, these should go somewhere people can understand what they meant, what they bought. Maybe a museum. Maybe just a place where soldiers' stories get remembered, where people understand that war isn't glory, it's just survival and sacrifice and doing terrible things for good reasons." "You want me to do that? When you're gone?" "I do. Promise me, Nathan. Promise me you'll make sure these mean something, that Alvin's death meant something, that all of it meant something." Nathan nodded, serious, understanding that he'd just been trusted with something important, something sacred. "I promise, Grandpa. I promise I'll remember. I'll make sure everyone remembers." They sat together on the porch in the afternoon light, grandfather and grandson, connected by stories and blood and boots without laces. Outside, the forest whispered secrets, birds sang, wind moved through the pines, and Elijah Hargrove felt, for the first time in 49 years, like maybe he could finally let it go. Like maybe he'd finally told the story that needed telling. Like maybe silence had finally been broken in the right way. He died 7 years later, 2001, January, peacefully, in his sleep, in the ranger station where he'd spent most of his adult life. Heart just stopped. No pain, no struggle, just stopped. Here one moment, gone the next. He was 81 years old. The funeral was small. Local paper ran a short obituary. Elijah Hargrove, retired game warden, WW2 veteran, beloved father and grandfather. No mention of the Hurtgen, no mention of 64 dead Germans, no mention of bootlaces or traps or 3 days that changed history. Just a quiet life, lived well, ended naturally. His sons buried him next to Lorraine, on the same ridge where Nathaniel lay. 3 generations of Hargroves watching over the valley they'd called home, the valley that had made them who they were. Nathan, 19 now and in college, carried a wooden box to the funeral, didn't open it, didn't explain it, just held it tight and remembered. Remembered promises made on a porch 7 years ago. Remembered boots without laces. Remembered the story his grandfather had finally told. 2 years later, he made a phone call to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. "I have something you need to see," he said. "Something that tells a story no one's ever heard." National World War II Museum, New Orleans, 2003, November. The exhibit opened on a Tuesday. Quiet opening, small ceremony, tucked away from the main galleries in a room that held stories too specific for the big picture. The Trapper's War, Elijah Hargrove, and the Hurtgen Forest Stand. 4 bootlaces under glass, frayed, brown, stained with rust that might be blood, might be mud, might be both. A photograph, young Eli, 24, eyes hollow with exhaustion, taken a week after the battle by a medic who'd kept the photo for 58 years. Another photograph, old Eli, 79, standing on his porch in Montana, same eyes but peaceful now, hands in pockets, slight smile. Home. German archival documents. Oberst Dietrich's report, discovered in 1989 by a historian researching Wehrmacht tactical failures in the West. The report that claimed 15 to 20 snipers. The report that proved one man had made the German army believe in ghosts. That proved the impossible was real. Alvin Makepeace's dog tags. Donated by his family after Nathan tracked them down in Nebraska. A Springfield rifle, not Eli's, his had been lost or destroyed after the war, but the same model, positioned with a bootlace tied to the trigger, showing how the trap worked, showing the elegant simplicity of killing. A placard told the story, condensed, sanitized for a museum, but true, essentially true. Private First Class Elijah Hargrove volunteered to hold a sector of the Hurtgen Forest alone for 3 days in October 1944. Using bootlaces from a fallen comrade and trapping techniques learned from his father, a Montana trapper, he created an illusion of a full sniper platoon. 64 German soldiers were killed. 200 were delayed long enough
for the 110th Infantry Regiment to retreat and regroup. Hargrove refused all medals and recognition, returning to Montana after the war to work as a game warden. He died in 2001. His story remained largely unknown until German military archives were opened in 1989 and cross-referenced with American unit records. Nathan stood in front of the exhibit on opening day. He was 25 now, had his grandfather's eyes, his grandfather's quiet way of standing, his grandfather's understanding that some stories take time to tell. A veteran approached him, old, probably in his 80s, wearing a 28th Infantry Division cap faded by sun and time, moving slowly, carefully, with a cane. "You here for the Hargrove exhibit?" the veteran asked, voice rough with age. "Yes, sir. He was my grandfather." The old man's eyes widened, actually widened. "Your grandfather? Jesus. He stopped, composed himself with visible effort. "I was in Company K, different platoon but same regiment, 110th Infantry. We all heard stories about the guy who held the sector alone, thought it was bullshit. You know how war stories are. Thought someone was exaggerating, making themselves sound better. But it was real? He really did it?" "It was real, sir. And he never talked about it? Never told anyone?" "Not for 50 years. Only told me once. Near the end. Made me promise to make sure it meant something. That Alvin Makepeace's sacrifice meant something. That all of it meant something." The veteran stared at the bootlaces, at the photographs, at the evidence of something impossible that had actually happened, at proof that myths could be real. "Tell him thank you," the old man said, voice breaking. "From all of us, from every man in the 110th who made it home. Tell him we knew someone had bought us time. We just never knew who. Tell him we lived because of what he did. Tell him we had families because of him. Tell him he was the best of us." "I will, sir." Nathan's voice was thick. "When I see him again, I'll tell him you remembered, that you're grateful, that it mattered." The veteran saluted, sharp, professional, the kind of salute you give to someone who saved your life, the kind that means everything. Nathan returned it, though he'd never served. Some salutes transcend rules. They stood together in silence, looking at 4 bootlaces that had changed the course of a war, and neither man felt the need to say anything more. Some moments are complete without words. The exhibit stayed open for 6 months. Thousands of people walked through. Veterans, students, families, history buffs, curious tourists. They stopped. They read. They tried to understand how one man with bootlaces and patience had killed 64 Germans and lived to tell about it. How one man had changed history with cord and patience and a trapper's knowledge. Most couldn't fully grasp it, the scale, the isolation, the survival. But they remembered, and that was enough. That was everything. Absaroka County, Montana, present day. The ranger station still stands, empty now, maintained by the Forest Service as a historical site. Hargrove Station on the maps. Visitors can hike up to it, see where Eli lived, where he raised his family, where he finally found peace after the war, where he built a life worth living. On the porch, there's a plaque installed in 2005. Elijah Hargrove, 1920 to 2001, game warden, World War II veteran, trapper's son. He did what had to be done, asked for nothing in return, and taught us that sometimes the quietest heroes are the ones who matter most. Patience beats speed. The trap does the work, you just set it right. The forest around it grows thick and green. Elk move through in the fall, bugling challenges that echo for miles. Wolves howl in winter, their voices carrying across valleys. The creek still runs past the side yard, making the same sound it made 80 years ago, when a boy learned to set traps from his father. Some nights when the wind is right and you're inclined to believe, you can almost hear voices, quiet, patient, teaching lessons about survival and patience and doing what needs to be done. about being a good man in a world that demands terrible things.
Some nights, if you believe in ghosts, and most people in Montana do, whether they admit it or not, you might see an old man walking the trap lines, checking his snares, making sure everything is exactly as it should be, making sure the forest is protected, making sure the lessons continue. And if you're very lucky, very quiet, very patient, you might hear him say the words his father taught him so long ago, words that saved hundreds of lives, words that ended 64 others, words that proved sometimes the simplest wisdom is the most profound. One shot, one kill. Patience beats speed every single time. The trap does the work. You just have to know where to set it. The lessons of a trapper's son, passed down through generations, bought with bootlaces and blood in a forest far from home. Lessons that saved hundreds of lives. Lessons that ended 64 others. Lessons that proved sometimes the simplest tools, in the right hands, wielded with patience and understanding, can change the world. The forest remembers, even if the rest of us forget. The trees hold secrets. The wind carries stories. And somewhere in the Hürtgen forest in Germany, there's a patch of ground where 64 Germans died and one American refused to. Where bootlaces became weapons. Where patience became survival. Where one man became a legend he never wanted to be. The forest remembers. We remember. And that's all any soldier ever really wants. To be remembered. To have mattered. To have done something that meant something. Eli Hargrove did. He mattered. His story matters. Even now. Especially now. Epilogue. October 15th to 17th, 1944. Private First Class Elijah Hargrove, 28th Infantry Division, Company K, 110th Infantry Regiment, held a sector of the Hürtgen Forest alone for 72 hours using 2 Springfield rifles, patience learned from a Montana trapper father, and bootlaces from a fallen comrade named Alvin Makepeace. 64 German soldiers were killed. 200 were delayed long enough for American forces to retreat and regroup. The German commander, Oberst Klaus Dietrich, reported encountering a specialized American sniper platoon of 15 to 20 men using advanced automated firing systems. He was wrong. It was one man, one trapper's son from Absaroka County, Montana, population 280, who'd learned his father's lessons well and applied them to war. Hargrove refused all medals, refused all interviews, refused recognition, returned to Montana after the war and became a game warden. Protected the forests he loved, raised 3 sons. Never told his story except once, to his grandson 50 years later, 7 years before his death. His name appears in no major history books, no monuments bear his face. Most people have never heard of him. But the men of Company K, 110th Infantry Regiment, went home. They had children. Those children had children. And somewhere in America today, there are people alive because a trapper's son knew how to set a trap and had the patience to wait. The bootlaces are in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. The lessons remain. The story matters. Sometimes the quietest heroes leave the loudest legacy. Sometimes patience beats speed. Sometimes the trap does the work. Sometimes bootlaces can change the world. We remember Elijah Hargrove. We remember Alvin Makepeace. We remember the 64 Germans who died far from home. We remember that war is hell, and survival is victory, and coming home is the only medal that truly matters. We remember. Always.